Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. I get a lot of emails every single day. Usually when I wake up in the morning, I have maybe 100, 200 emails. And unlike a lot of people, I respond to all of them. Anyway, I was asked in an email, I'm curious to know, since you do so many tasks in a day, how do you deal with content switching? I can do a task for 60 minutes, but doing something different immediately requires some time for the brain and the body to handle the transition. So how do you manage these transitions? That's a good question, isn't it? How do you manage transitions? My approximate formula is like this: high intensity, break, low intensity. You notice how it goes? High, break, low, break, high, break, low. When you first see the switching formula, it seems like it's just a transition from high to low. But as you can tell from the emphasis, the break is pretty critical. If you just go from high to low, or even from low to high, the brain doesn't get time to recover. And recovery is what's important when you want to keep your attention and your focus. Without recovery, you get a factor of tiredness that may also spiral downwards to exhaustion. But with recovery, your brain and body get a chance to relax and to come back to take on that next battle. It's at this point that the high to low bit also matters. Taking on high intensity tasks one after the other just wears you out, and having the high to low allows your brain to make a decent transition and to relax even more after you've had that break. But how long are the breaks? The breaks tend to be around every 30 to 45 minutes. A simple alarm or timer that does a countdown will enable you to take that break. But there are days when I will ignore the timer, as we all do, and that's the day when I get more tired. But there are days when I'm smarter and the timer goes off and I give my brain and my body a break. So I lie down on the floor, yes, on the floor, and I have 2 books to rest my head in a semi-supine position. If you don't know what a semi-supine position is, it's a system that is in the Alexander technique, where you lie down with your legs almost like the letter A. And that allows the fluids in your body to move around, and it helps your back, it helps your body a lot. And look it up on YouTube. What is the semi-supine position? And that enables me to rest my brain and my body. The question is, how long are the breaks? The breaks depend on the time of day. During the day when I'm at work, the breaks are short. However, around lunchtime, it might be around 30 minutes or more. At tea time, I will take another 30 minutes. It seems like a lot of downtime, but that's the reason why you can achieve more. When you first hear the concept, it sounds totally bizarre. How can taking more time off achieve more? That's precisely the crux of higher productivity. The more you work, the longer stretches you work, the more tired you're going to get. If you're younger, you might brush this off because you seem to have boundless energy. But in tests, young tennis players were matched against each other, and the top players were always the ones that recovered better. So it's the recovery period that forms the core of productivity. And it helps in switching tasks as well. My day starts off with high intensity. I will either be writing a book or answering some questions on a course or be in the membership site at 5000 BC. A lot of these activities involve not just reading, but analysis and giving precise direction. It's mentally draining, and after 90 minutes or so, with rest periods in between, I'll go for a walk. That's a long break. And when I get back, I will make breakfast and watch some comedy on YouTube while cooking up some dosas. Then it's time to paint for a while. And what we've done is gone through a cycle of high intensity to break to low intensity, which would involve something like email or something that doesn't require a ton of resources. The day moves on from there to writing scripts for the podcast, to answering 5000 BC posts before it's time for lunch and another break. So my day is filled with high intensity tasks, breaks, low intensity tasks, breaks, and then back to high intensity tasks. If you would like to follow along this same formula and be productive, pay attention to the formula and do the semi-supine. If you don't have a great floor, get a yoga mat, relax on the ground. The more you fight your brain and body, the harder it is to switch. It also doesn't allow you to reach your highest productivity level. And that, in a nutshell, is how I go about the day. But what about projects? This takes us to the second part, which is how high and low tasks apply to projects as well. Do you see marathon runners doing laps after they run past the finish line? A marathon is often run in trying conditions, and it's a perfect example how you and I should feel after completing a project. We should feel exhausted, yet many of us believe that we're good enough to do laps shortly after our epic run. Take for instance a course. I just finished the First 50 Words course 10 days ago. It was high intensity because psychotactics courses are based on skill. That means every assignment will have its own work, and then every amendment that you make based on my correction needs to be looked after. It needs to be corrected. Which is why just 25 clients generate more than 10,000 posts in just 8 weeks. So, what was my plan right after the course ended? I was readying myself for the very next project. That's what I did. At any given point in time, I am behind by at least 20 to 200 projects. Why? Because I dream up all these things that I have to do, and I'm eager to start and complete them. However, that stack of work doesn't ever reduce, which is why I assumed I'd be back to work after a short break. Now, we took our break. We left home, we went away for a few days over the weekend, and then it happened. By Tuesday morning, I was like jello. I was listless. I couldn't get anything done, and frankly, I would have been happy to just sleep for half the day and watch Netflix for the other half. Crazy as that Netflix sleeping agenda sounds, it's what we all need to do to achieve a lot. Just like a day where you have high intensity and lower intensity jobs, you need something similar with projects. A day is like a 100-meter sprint. Yes, you can do laps if you like after you breach the ribbon. And the project, that's like a marathon. No laps there. So designing those recovery periods is very crucial for your energy. And when you have that energy, you have recovery. That enables you to achieve a lot more. In some countries, achievement is viewed as go, go, go. People who stop and relax are considered to be the tortoises. And yet, we know how the tortoise and hare story turned out, right? All of this comes down to a fair bit of planning and energy management, which means that in every day, every week, and every month, the most important task is not doing the task, but in carving aside time for planning. When we plan, we usually need to work with both days and projects. A project that's short, like writing an article, can be managed in a day or a couple of days. When I write an article or write a script for the podcast, it can take between 2 to 3 days in short bursts. The first section of this very article was written a few days ago, then followed by the second section. And it's not like it takes me 3 days to write an article. The actual time taken is about 45 minutes for about 800 to 1,000 words. However, if it's a longer article or podcast, then I treat it as high intensity. The outline is low intensity, then every section of the article is high intensity, and the editing is low intensity. Now, all of these have to be done with breaks in between. Running a course or preparing a workshop or writing a book, that's super high intensity, and it requires a marathon-like planning. This planning becomes the crux of the issue. Productivity is far superior when you're working with a plan. Why? Because it allows you to be creative. When you have a draft, you can improvise as you go instead of having to make it up on the spot. Take, for instance, the early podcast that I recorded. This is going back to podcast 1 to, say, 50 or 60. I had an outline, but I didn't have a script. It may sound very much like a live speech when you listen to it, because that's what it was. But when I was done with the recording, I'd be wiped out for hours on end. Worse still, I couldn't ever use the transcript because the podcast was more like a series of thoughts than a coherent structure of information. Writing the script in advance takes a lot of planning, but the text can be edited, can be grammar checked. And then this high intensity, super high intensity of recording isn't so tedious after all. And we've stumbled on to an important point here. Any project or daily activity can be classified into low or high intensity. What causes a task to be super high intensity is the lack of any break, or at least a lack of a sufficient break. After slogging it out for about 8 weeks in the course, surely I should have known better than to just go right back to work on Tuesday. But as my niece Kara would say, silly Shawnee. And silly Shawnee went to work, didn't do a lot of stuff, and didn't quite get back to 100% until the following week. So breaks matter even with small or large projects. And at the point of being repetitive, the preparation is what matters. We avoid it because it seems like such a waste of time that we don't have to spare in the first place. So we sidestep the planning, we sidestep the outlining, and we take what is already high intensity and we make it super high intensity. Not surprisingly, we crash and burn. Having ideas for dozens of projects is pretty typical for most entrepreneurs. To focus on one thing is nice in theory, but it's easy to bounce off into another project and a third project. Part of being in business is that you can jump back and forth. So the advice of focus on one thing, that's nice, but it's hard to adhere to all the time. You're constantly context switching because it's often fun to do so. However, to avoid being silly Shawnee, I have to do what will allow me to achieve my goals as well as prevent any burnout. And this takes us to the third part, which is what if we have too much work? What do we do then? How do we know when to stop? How do we know when that juggling has to come to an end? Let's find out in the third section. You've seen how planes circle the airport, right? Eventually all those planes have to land, and that much we are pretty sure about. However, let's look at your project list and see what's on it. That's the exercise that I went through a few weeks ago, and I realized that some of my planes weren't landing at all. There was this cartoon project from 2010 which wasn't completed. The book series on teacher versus preacher, not done. The books on the talent equation, not done. Our website, which started 2 years ago, that's the new one, not done. So don't get me wrong. While about 22 items were on the not done list, a lot of things did get done. The article writing course was completely rewritten with new notes, audio, and assignments, and came out in version 2.0. The first 50 words course also went through a complete revamp and is in version 2.0. Still have to write the notes, but it's in version 2.0. A lot of the projects got done, so there's no doubt that things are happening. It's not like we're just lying around doing nothing. However, there's still the issue of those planes that are circling the airport. They are not landing now, or from the looks of it, ever. And that's when I knew that productivity itself wasn't helping. Which is why I have to step aside and then carve an entire chunk of time to get to do the things that I really want to achieve. Let's take, for example, our move to New Zealand. When we moved to New Zealand back in the year 2000, it was a significant change and an important one. We needed to create space to make the move because it involves so many elements. If you asked me back then if 3 months were needed to move between countries, I'd say that we needed that much time at the bare minimum. It involved moving between countries, stopping work, getting rid of any income that I was getting back in India. And what this seems to suggest is that we understand the enormity of working on what's important in our lives. We easily figure out how much time we need to create great work. And yet we seem to ignore what is really important in our lives. When you have too many planes above your head, it's time to make some space. This year we had the article writing course and the headlines course, and it was scheduled for late 2017. Now that's been postponed to mid-2018. And early 2018 doesn't have any new projects either. We decided to land the planes, and that includes writing the books and finishing the website that mocks me every time I look at it. But won't creating a space become a setback? The move to New Zealand was a setback when you look at it, but that's only when you look at it from the point of view of income. In time, it proved to be one of the most important moves we ever made. In the past, we've dropped entire courses like the year-long Protégé course. That could be seen by most as a setback because it meant a huge drop in income. The reality is that it provided space to think and to implement what was important instead of just plowing on madly. When you leave too many planes circling, it also takes a ton of your energy because you and I, we're both aware of the circling planes. But the question does remain, will landing the planes lead to greater profit? At Psychotactics, we found that there is a loss at first when you consider revenue. The article writing course and the headlines course themselves, which we've just dropped for this year, they generate over $100,000. Even if you're doing very well in life, it's not easy to walk away from that kind of money. So will landing those planes, those projects that we want to complete, will that cover the profit? The answer is no one knows for sure. What we do know is that in all the areas where we have landed the planes in the past, we have made some space in the air. We've had more time for ourselves, which is the most important gift of all. But to date, that dip in monetary profit was soon replaced by something even more profitable. What I'm really saying here is that when you look at the balance sheet, you may not make more money, but you're not likely to make any less either. The area where you will profit excessively is in the energy field, in the excitement as you start to land all those planes that have been circling. And when you are energized, productivity and achievement seem to follow almost like puppies. Making space for the things that are really important in our lives, whether it's personal or business, is very critical. And really, that's what we have to do. That's how things start to improve in our lives. And that brings us to the end of this podcast, so let's do a little summary. If I sound disciplined, well, I'm not. I get distracted just as quickly as the next person, and I have the productivity apps on my phone to prove it. But what I've found in life is that to get things done, you have to have a sort of formula. And that's what we covered in the first part. We saw that I moved from high intensity tasks to a break, and then to low intensity tasks, then another break, and then to high intensity again. So all these breaks, they are what help me to do a lot of stuff. And if you watch what I do, you'll know that I do a lot of stuff. It's cartoons and writing and forums and courses and books and workshops. And let's not forget this podcast. So that's a lot of stuff to do. And the only way I can manage it is to have this high intensity break, low intensity break, high intensity. That's the formula that works. And while we're on that break section, it's also important to get on the floor and get into that semi-supine position so that you rest your back and also keep the fluids in your body in good shape. I don't know what exactly it does, but I believe that it's good for me. The second thing is just the difference between running a 100-meter sprint and a marathon. An article is like a 100-meter sprint. I'm done with it very quickly. It's high intensity, but I can get over it. The problem is when I deal with a longer thing like a book or a course, and that break really matters at that point in time. And most of us tend to go from one project to another project, never taking those breaks. And therefore, burnout is very highly possible. But what's more important is that our productivity definitely goes down. So even though we're sitting at our computer, we're not achieving as much as we can. And this is important because if you can achieve your work in less time because you're more productive and more focused, then you can take more time off. Planning, of course, becomes the crux of the issue. And without planning, we're just wasting time. Finally, in the third part, we looked at the factor of juggling. How do you know when you have to stop juggling? The answer for me is when I look at those circling planes. When I have all those projects that I've wanted to do for a long time and I'm not doing it, then I know that those planes have to land, and that's when I have to make space. And in the past, I've made space both personally and professionally. And at first, it hasn't worked out. But in the long run, I was so glad that I made that space. And it's been profitable. Even though it doesn't seem that way, it's been more profitable to make the space than not to make it. And that's what we have for this podcast. So that brings us to the end, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was slightly different from the usual podcast, but let me know if you enjoyed it. So what's happening in Psychotactics land? Well, the cartooning course conducted by Alison Beer is still on, so you want to make sure that you get on the waiting list. This is a lot of fun, doing cartoons. You cannot imagine how much fun it is when you can control something that you thought you could never do in your life. You would say, well, I can't draw a straight line. Well, you can draw a straight line, and really, you don't have to draw any straight lines because it's all squiggly lines. That's what cartoons are all about. In just a few weeks, you start to draw stuff from Ice Age, from Snoopy. It's pretty cool what you can achieve in a very short time. So go to psychotactics.com/DaVinci. That's DAVINCI. And that's where you will find the waiting list for the Psychotactics cartooning course. You'll enjoy it. You really will. In about 5 weeks from now, Renuka and I head to Scandinavia. We go to Sweden, where I'm speaking at Brennan Dunn's conference. That's just for one day. After that, email stops, everything stops, no work for the next 5 weeks, I think. We go from there to Denmark and then onwards to Leiden, which is near Amsterdam, and finally to Singapore. We're going to have meetups though. The meetups are very informal. Singapore and Amsterdam are full, I think, and there are some seats left in Sweden, which is in Stockholm. So psychotactics.com/meetup. And finally, 5000 BC. It's a place for introverts where you can ask your questions and be very safe in 5000 BC. This is so different from all of those places, those membership sites out there, those forums where they make fun of you for asking questions because they're supposed to be silly questions. There are no silly questions in 5000 BC. And often, very often, in fact, almost frequently, I will answer your questions with an entire series of articles, or you will find the information there. So that's me from Psychotactics Land saying bye for now, and I hope you step up that productivity. Join us in 5000 BC, start taking action. There is a Taking Action forum. We'll see you there. Bye for now.